Tene ta tano nga drukapso ta chitang cheke pardon chapso te chupare la tene ta te teka la song tang na ta te semba te kipu me bandabo tan chiwa sinki te kor te hedu te la te semba made wandabo semba jo wandabo ta tene te jitwa je wandabo ta tende yungi yore la tene te zomdo yung maze tang huma nga mechik nangpa mahingpi mechik tene sena ta chitang chulu sinki te jay me nyingdop ya perya andabo ta me sen te kipo ta devo gabu zoya ke cheto re la tene nangpa sanji pe chu te la tene mata pa tong da me pa tong tong pa tong dulce pato la ya mare tene te pe chu de ya fa mare se tene ngala lap nyong la te ya tu ko yo mare te yendo ta tanda ka sa la yan chiwa ta pardo ta te ki de la te si semba jo anda bo yong se gre la tene te yendo kasin ngara bolder ne interview si de ko me che gala na che se ngara so nampa sa ji bala te si tipo da bo zo ya tene la ya yo mare be ta pa ma ta pa dan chiwa da ta tene la de ne tipo cha mandu asi tene la mandu ba tene bo ji re te si semba jo anda bo yong se gre te yin na ya tanda chiwa sinki te ta ngara so la ta ji pe thama la chiwa sinki te kora ta men ji tin jitin che konde zeni jirela ta tela tene te nangpa sanji pi chu go ne zoi ga banda bo tende kaya mare khora ranking ta te kapsa to zursa tusa tsani me banda bo chela yorela tene tin chiwa te la tige te yapu che tige kangal te mati ba che kangal te manti pe go ne atene chei ngara devo ndoto pa chei ta ti kangal te le pa zorne tene devo ta chipo che se ne tene ngarang maung ben damami yapo che chol to pa che sona tene te pe gupi ge nimbo ndo che re la tene teacher na te tartu ko on se na pe kal chembo yimba che ta nekab ko on se na ya ta ngara so tende si depe kabla che na ayon ta maung pal kandin da jiri on samne che sembate la te sinji to ta pa to anda bo che tapa yungi yo la tene ngara so ge tene pardu ge nyamlen da bo ta pardo la khande yungi ya pa ten so ya bo che hi nyamlen ya bo che thup na a ta cheng ge mare ta ngara chen sa me ta ngara lam che gre som semba dating ndo to ba che ta yungi yo pa la teacher na jetun mala ripi so na ngan chiwi nje ni rela chen chen 다는 침이 제전사 사인시 되니까 콘테지 담보다니 relaya 드바예 데니 지마 다 드라마 그바 지와싱기 데라 가야 드라마 그바 제마 그바 텐데 야부 정송 송한테 라 베데 연도 땅아란서 베 냠네 제버진지 톱나에 pe ang tang bo tin je nyam ne che par je tang han je tu to chim bo ten zo in da lu la pe to ba tang kha che gi chen pe to ba tin jong yo re lang ran so yo te yung ma re se ne tha je khain yo ma re su yin na ya zen ju to nyam ne ya bo je to na te ta bu yung tu gre la je ji te ta bu yung ma to na ya tang ran so gi ta che che chu me je ge ta tang be chu chu go le yo kalbasang puchong teni ti taine ta maung pala teni pardu ke kapla yang pembe ke dangwa khahi ji teni nyamsalin thupna ya angka tangpo nyamsalin ma thupna ya yapo ji ko na o ta tika la tende ji go gen yosa doga samba ji ke ta pe na ngaran so sasha jumilan ro ka so la sata na ki ta deni dana pa ron deni dana chur na teni kangal me ba ji yapo ji un to ge yosa re ba so ne te ji sana pa topa dain topa ndabo tende yungi yo la tene nyamsalin thupna angi tangbuche nyamsalin matupna yo halon chungo ji rotong hi na delayam pento chembo yungi yo la tene teacher na tanda nyamne nangjo tang senjong nangjo tenzo pe kal chembo re
This morning we looked at the interval of the time of death, or the Bardo of the time of death. And I am well aware that this is, from one point of view, a very unpleasant thing to talk about. It's unpleasant. It may even be frightening. You may find it depressing. People often do. Once a non-Buddhist said to me, "Look, the point of religion is to provide consolation and comfort. Buddhism doesn't do this. All you talk about is selflessness, emptiness, death, suffering, impermanence." And once in an interview that I gave in Boulder, someone said to me, "Don't you think it's time that we Buddhists started to talk about things that will make people happy? All we talk about is impermanence and depressing things and what's wrong." In spite of the fact that people often come up with these objections to these topics, the fact remains that death is not a Buddhist invention. It is the natural and indeed inevitable culmination of birth. That being the case, since we cannot avoid death, it would seem worthwhile to prepare ourselves for it so that this necessary experience be more pleasant rather than less pleasant. So therefore, there is a long-term point in the consideration of what will happen to us at the time of death. But there's also an immediate benefit as well. Normally, we spend much of our lives subject to an underlying anxiety. And much of this anxiety is a fear of what is going to become of us, what is going to happen to us in the end. Much of this is really centered around dying, as much as we may try not to think about it. If you understand exactly what dying is and what will happen to you at the time of your death, you can dispel much of this anxiety because you will have the confidence of knowing that you are prepared for death. About this, Jetsun Milarepa said, "I initially fled to the mountains out of fear of death, but as a result of this, I have now attained a state beyond death." As he said, great practitioners have continued to attain states of realization, the rainbow body, the achievement of the celestial or Kachari state, and so on. And there's really no reason, fundamentally, why we cannot achieve these same states ourselves. But even if we do not practice enough to achieve these states, through practicing Dharma oriented toward preparation for death and the Bardo, we will benefit greatly. And even if we don't practice, even to know about what will happen is helpful because it will prepare us to some extent and give us confidence. If you're going somewhere and you know you're going there, it seems worthwhile to find out about this place to which you are going. So at best, if you can practice, of course, that is the best. But even not, to simply know about what happens when you die and after death would seem to be of great importance.
Tene ta tege ta tanong kyoki ki chuntin tela kitang ke ta ko korem yendula che injua de ton nang nang hi de ton ta te hybarela ta di kapsula ngaran su nyongning kan de che go yore ta di kapsula ta te ngaran su riba dem go yore riba dem kapla kan de nang go yore se na ta di ge di te de sonre la tini te yan chitang tu jondo tini duji tang chi mata pa yin bala gam na tini ta ti ge mata pa yin ba te ten du te si sang la jo hin ra bo yong ri wa re te yin na yang uni chiwa to to pa pa kap so la mata pa za ni ma din tini nyima jelin chiwa to to pa na be sang la tini ji ta Sanla, tene dungal, shukchebo, zemin rabuji, yungi yore la. Tene tujundo yonsi tena, teko tujundo ten deba indu tera desi, teni chiwa lepe kapsu la yang te semba te tembo nabo ji zo ju yoba ta ngarang so ndende ngarang chayin ndende ji zo gi yin ta te yung re yung du te la ngarang ndende ji gu re sombe sem te la te tembo nabo ji yung re la teni teacher na teni kap kala mata pa gang ju te ta pe kal chembo teni mata pa somba ta ta bo jai tang teni te yendo jai ngarang so tambe chu dong za ni man thi ba yin na teni jai ka du yin na ya teni chen di ge no la pe hian cha chim bo ta bu ji yung kre la chen di ge no te la pe hian cha chim bo jai ta ngarang ge se nor long je la so ba la pe me si pe hian cha chim bo teni ni za ro la so ba la pe me si pe hian cha chim bo ji chang na teni lo bur den chi wa to to pam na teni tel pe sem cha teni tel hian cha chim bo lu tang ma so ban da bo ten de yung ge wa la te ma yin ba te si hian cha ka se yin na chung du tang ge tap da bo ji yang si so mo tang ma teni ti ge pe pen to chim bo yung ge wa re dong bo mo ta pa ga ba la ten pa jai tang te ji so la cha yin chung du tang ge tap teni kāng lī na ya chā yin tāng te yin tā dā la dāng wā tāng yin na chak pa la su pa yin chung tu tāng ni teni kāsi tu jik xie na pe pen to chimbo yung yu wa re teni tā tī kāp tu na la teni chi wā tu tu pa pa kāp la kāri chi gu kari xie na teni tā tī kāp tu na la cheke somba te pe top chenpo yung yore la top chenpo yung yin pe cher na ta ngarang ke chen da la jai dipa mi gewa se yo pan da bota damba tong tong si nyang so da bota tin den da ji yo na ni pa tong tong da bota tin de yo na ngarang ke ngu si hi pa yo na yan da ngarang ke ngu si ma hi pa tin de yung se ge la tin te tang ni ta te tin cher do sang je da chang ju sem ba che par jin da tin rang lama la so pa thong de hya pa pro yin sam ni hya dam ya po je xie teni ngu su teni lama yo na ya rong ngu su lama me na ya teni rang jam ne ge yul tab de teni lama nan jun ro gom ne teni rang ji zu la za we lama de yu ya pa gom za we lama om ji pe lama ta ngarang so ge pe pa ta yi chi su la ya pa de teni te tabu gom, ten tsawe lama la yang gom matub na yang kaxi ge tanda jamga kontru rinpoche ge sam na teni jay mamata sam rabo teni jalma nyongwa yin na ya rang tsawe lama yin ba jitsu to gom ni sorwa tab na teni singap thau gare teni sam yo re la te tabu yin na yang rong te teni te tabu jitsu la gom ni sorwa tab teni tingen zin jo on long teni ta ti singap nyo yo samba teni te tabu je si tup na teni te pe kalpa sangpa yinpa je tang teni chewe ge kap so zhu yin na ya teni samban tamba tangpi chue tang tenpa je yaqbo je teni ngarang ge pe sem tong mentenpa ngarang ge sem la mababa teni ma yinpa ta yaqbo je yo na teni ti ge te la chodong la sopa jewe ge yum ripa yum minjongwa tene te yendo je tangde chula yo te kulman rabo rang sen yo te zain tenkin rabo ta tende ya ba yin bichna hindu le la si tene so.
This morning we looked at the process and sequence of dissolution which constitutes the experience of dying and death. The question remains, how do we practice during this? That is to say, what specific things are necessary in order to prepare ourselves for these experiences, and also where do we place our attention during these experiences? According to our text, the first thing that is necessary preparation is the regular contemplation of impermanence. The contemplation of impermanence during one's life, throughout one's life, may not be a particularly cheerful thing to do. It can make you sad. But it seems to be necessary, because if you ignore impermanence during your life, then death will come as something of a shock to you. And if you're shocked by death, then you may panic. On the other hand, if you have remained aware of the coming of death throughout your life, and if with that awareness you have carefully thought what you're going to do, at this stage of dying I will do this, at this stage I will do this, and so on, then you will not be shocked by it and will be far less likely to panic when it happens. So the first practice that is necessary as preparation is the regular contemplation of impermanence. The second is to consciously try to reduce the amount of attachment you have toward the things of this life, and correspondingly aversion that goes along with that. Someone who has never encountered Dharma and who has therefore never thought of an alternative to this is naturally going to be very attached to the appearances of this life, because that is all that they know. As long as you are attached to this life, to friends, possessions, and so forth, then you will experience death as a forced separation from these, and you will be unable and unwilling to give these up. The solution to this is, throughout your life, to recollect this and reflect on the need to diminish your attachment and, as well, your aversion. So the first practice is the contemplation of impermanence, and the second one is the attempt to reduce attachment and aversion. And these in themselves will be of great benefit. In addition, there are specific things that will be helpful while you are actually dying. Our text points out that the state of mind and the thinking of the dying person is of great significance and a great power. So as you approach death, it's important to bring to mind anything that you've done, any unvirtuous actions, and especially any violations of vows or samayas and so on that you are worried about, and confess them to the visualized presence of your gurus and the three jewels. And when you do that, you can also confess all of the things that you've probably done but you don't remember. Having done that, then either in the actual presence of your guru or in the visualized presence of the guru, you perform the practice of guru yoga, visualizing either your root guru or a lineage guru if there's one to whom you are particularly devoted above your head. With regard to this, Dzogchen Lodrö has said that it is acceptable to consider, for example, Lords Marpa, Milarepa, or Gampopa to be one's root guru, even though one has not met them. And by visualizing them above one's head and supplicating them, one will receive their blessing. In any case, you visualize the guru above your head, you supplicate for their blessing, you receive the empowerments in meditation, and you remain in the confidence that you've actually received the guru's blessing. If you can do this while you are dying, this will be of tremendous benefit. With regard to the environment that you set up, you should ensure that those around you as you die are people with whom you have a harmonious relationship, those you find agreeable, and those who will be supportive of your intention to die in a certain way. So in other words, they have an attitude which is accepting or encouraging of Dharma, and they will encourage you in your process of conscious dying. And there are those who will not give rise to excessive attachment or aversion in your mind.
Tene ta tejendo tanda hyuge tro sinking tenzo ya tene jai hajang nyanging naning tene ngoa tan ke japala soba ta siena ya ta teji sinking te sem joanda bota sem madewanda bota sana dunghanda bo yungi yo la teta bo yo mai ba ya te tsewa me nambanda bo ya maten pa tsewa ta dembe ke namba tenju ta teni chula tepa yebe nambatan tempa tenne ta che shewe ke tru sedu ngune somba zangbu ge go ne parupu tronkin te ngune ta lam yang ta ba che topa dungan me pa de ji tam tempa che ke thaki kan tho che shepa mato teni che tanda che chula tronkin te ke samatana ta che longche ke tendo ngam de pan ra che da teni che tela shinkin tela yang tsewa me pan ra che da yana pe me si pe nyang in chembo ye pe nam pan ra che thon na teni ti ke te si te koran lam drepa tela te si kangan ra tan chingin ra yung gi wa la ti tru ti ke teni zap zap chi pe zap ne ta ti kap tana la pe tru ya po chi si thup na nguni ke pen thu chingi yimba che yimbi cherna ti kap tana la teni che ching pan ra chi chong ma kyo wa te pe kal che gi yo re teni te yendo tandani zonde ta chitang tumdem tenzo sacho la tambaton cho me la tambaton me long la tambaton long nam khala tambala so batar mba yendo la njungi yopate teni ta ti che dorem ga on se na njunga ya remji dogi yopate ta nang tumdem ga on se na kalam to manam to mala la so bata tenzo yunya tenzo la teni che to dang nang ga to dang sang ga to tenki to ten nam la te si yapo lo la ngi pa si ne ta ngaran den de yung do tin chung ka lan den de gure den de yin som pa ta che ta teni ne pa te la ro sing kin na ya ta tin su yapo je ha ko na ta pha shi re na le gi wanda ti kap na lan den de yin sa re som pa ta che kal che wa yin be cherna tang bo ni lo lan jo tan den de gi jil den de yung gure gi jil den de yung gi yo pa som ne de ta be hi pa te kal che wa re so la teni nguni ke chewe tu la pa pa ka sala teni lu chi ni de rab na zo pu si go gre teni te la te chi na san da bo ta dung han da bo ge zo pu si ma nu na yu ye pa te sala phap ne ta zo pu sun ji cham din de nyang ne da ka sala ya teni te ta bu chi chi ne ko ba nyang ne de pa re la te tar do sang ji ji su tam pa ta teni rang cha lung la so pa yung tab de we ge chi to yu ye pa sala phap ne teni nyal ne ta ngaran che we ge tadik che pa teni te ya ta khande ge sen la gamja te khande ti go gre se na ta ngaran ge sen ndala za za che pa yin nda te si nyam ne to hyu yin teni yang na ngaran ge hini ya po gamba yin ta ngaran hini la lo ti jorwa ya na kunzo sonchu ge sen la lo ti jorwa ya na teni ta da long thong go on de se na cha chen bo gamba la lo ti jorwa ya na zoba chen bo gamba la lo ti jorwa ya na yiram jalai kerem gamba la lo ti jorwa ta che ngarang gande se pa yin sambati ge ne dun ro che nang ne ta te ka yin ya ta hini gamba ge ka ina tni sem te tembu yo tni ti sem te njepata sente joata njito ko on to mahiro sembati lepo sin riba demni ta tiga ngarange jewa chimala do kapta te yendo tanda no anda manda chawe kapsula yo sentro non go on to mahiro wa ji za jini tengo ge ya pa ta tene te yendo la kunzo chonchu ke sen chamba da nje la kamba ta ba je yin tanda donc lo juta yi lo jong ka tangwa ka non to song na tene tanda tene dedu tongling ke mi pa si ne tene ti ke kap che o te phandro kap sala tene dedu tongling ke mi pa ta che te tene o den ro to pa chang na tene chitang ke che ke dangwa ke ro ji mang bu yo re te yin na ya ndele sapa kembo re song ne tene chi ne ta te lo jong ka dangwa tel tera nang yo re la tene te ta bu ji si thup na ya ta ngaran so che ke pa cha te kal che wa yin be cherna tene ti ke somba zangbo ta zonchu ke sem ta chabata ni ji kum ho te tikap sa maji pa ye pa la tini pardu ne kala yuna ya tini chambata ninji chongchu kusante maji baji yungi ya bajaita tini jewa lembe kapsala yung chambata ninji to chongchu kusan jila maji baji yungi ya bajaita tini jewa chimala yung teta bu pocha ti salbu che yungi ya bayin bichirna tarbu pocha jila yaju ya bata tipe penso chimbo yin tini song yo la tini teta bu je se ne ta rang lo jong la nyam ne ya po je se ya bayin na teta bu gam na yung digi yo re.
Carefully choosing your companions at the time of death is of great importance. You should avoid being surrounded by individuals who will display excessive grieving while you are dying, such as by wailing or weeping and so on, because this will upset you. On the other hand, you also don't want people who don't care about you at all and whose lack of caring would also upset you. You want to be surrounded by companions and caregivers who are supportive of Dharma, who are going to support what you are trying to do as you die. You don't want people who are simply waiting for you to die so that they can get your stuff, or people who don't care about you at all, or people whose grief is so uncontrollable that they will upset you. So there's great importance in carefully choosing your companions at that time. In preparation for your own death, you should learn as much as you can about the stages of dissolution that were described, the stages in which the elements dissolve one into another, accompanied by their external, internal, and secret indications, and also the stages of internal dissolution, the whiteness, redness, blackness, and so forth. You should learn these well enough so that you can actually plan how you're going to deal with each stage as it arises. It's best if, in addition, your caregivers, those who are going to be around you at the time of death, can learn these things well enough that they will be able to tell, because of the external signs, how far you've gone in the dissolution or dying process, because they'll be more able to provide you assistance the more they know about what's happening to you. When you're actually dying, if it's possible, it's good to be sitting up. But if that's not possible, you should try to lie on the right side of your body. This was the posture the Buddha took at the time of his parinirvana. It's appropriate not only in recollection of the Buddha, however, but because it makes the channels, winds, and drops more pliant. With regard to what you meditate on as you die, it's generally speaking advisable to concentrate on whatever practice done by you during your life you have the greatest confidence in. So if you principally practiced tranquility meditation, you would practice that. If you practiced insight, you would practice that. If you practiced insight according to a specific tradition, such as, for example, the Mahamudra tradition or the Great Perfection tradition, you would implement the instructions, the particular instructions that you practiced. If you practice the meditation on a particular yidam assiduously, then you would do that. In short, you apply the instructions with which you have the greatest familiarity. For example, if your principal practice was tranquility meditation, then at the time of death, you would attempt to relax your mind as much as possible, especially be free of the obstacles to tranquility, such as regret and agitation, and establish a faculty of mindfulness that would enable you to resist the tendency to be overpowered by and panic during the various appearances. Another thing that is of great benefit is the practices concerned with relative bodhicitta. Jomgon Lodro Tai wrote that if you can die doing the practice of the taking and sending of suffering and happiness, that even though there are all sorts of famous instructions for how to die, he said it would be very hard to find one that was more profound or more beneficial than just that. Especially for those who have emphasized the practice of Mahayana mind training or Lojong in their life, to consciously cultivate love, compassion, bodhicitta, and benevolence during the dying process will be very powerful. Because if you die in that state of mind, then that state of mind will naturally reoccur in the bardo. You will take birth with that state of mind and that motivation, and therefore in the next life, that state of mind will naturally arise habitually within you.
Tene ta tejendo chaja chimbuda ta chaja chimbu senji nelu ngote toke de gom yunki ta tene tejendo zoba chimbu ina tejega lam nyamni nangkin raboje yena tene tikap tana la ta rang senji nelu ko ngote chone tene temrem ga kapsul no mandawa kan sharna ya ta seni nelu ti ngondo le ne yangsi gomna tini ti ge tanon konto kyupa yendo tanda tini vesal mabu ngontre ne tini pe te la pento chenpo yungu yo pa jay tang tini ta te yendo yang jay tögal ga tini gom jab nyungkin rabo jay tang tini ta te tabu jay yen na tini jay ta ti kap jay nongwa tong membe tingin zang tini te jay ta nongchab mandrawa kari xargi yo na ya ta tandan yunga yibo te tem yung temrem tenzo xiawe kap so la yung tini ti nong tong yen mi ga ngondo chong ne tini gomju ya pa jay pe ti chong ne tini ti na la chul suwan rabo ta tini ta jay tremit suwan rabo ma hin pa ripa chong ne gom tu na pe ti ngondo troju ya pa jay ta ti pento chenpo yung yo la tini te yendo ta iram jalai cherem na te se kamban rabo chi na tini ti iram jalai samung te maji pa tene ta te yendo samung te maji pe ngong la tene ta te ripa dram top na ta cheke ta ti nam to in bicher na tene iram jalai sila kyo iram jalai tuje to sila la tene hingam lan roto pan rabo ta tene kiawa zambo len to pan rabo ta pardu noa la yin na yin pardu noa tru nong chenpo hiu chenpo me jongwa ta tene yung togi yo la te ta po gamba jay ta tene ta te yendo tanda tumola sopa gangki na tene kalam to malam to malam tenzu shari yung kapsula tene jay dige Vipashyana dedong ke yihi jela jibi ke ngon rabu ji jang na tene tela tene pento chenpo yung yo re song yo.
If your principal practice was either Mahamudra, which in this case refers to the recognition of and meditation on the mind's nature, or the equivalent in the Great Perfection tradition, the practice of breakthrough, in either case, then you would go through the dying process while resting in the identified nature of your mind. Within that state, you would continue to relax in that recognition regardless of whatever appearances, such as those of the various stages of dissolution and so forth, arise. And through relaxing in that recognition of your mind's nature, when the ground clear light arises, you would recognize it, and what is called the meeting of the mother and son clear lights could occur. If your principal practice was the leapover practice of the Great Perfection, the yogas of light and darkness and so forth, then you would go through the stages of dissolution in the conscious recognition of the appearances that arise during them as the inseparable unity of appearance and emptiness, and in that way would guard yourself against bewilderment or unconsciousness and achieve liberation in that manner. If you principally practice the generation stage of a particular yidam, then you would maintain the clear appearance of that deity during the dying process. And because of the power of the mind at the time of death, you would thereby receive the blessing of that deity and be reborn in that deity's realm without a great deal of disturbance or unpleasant hallucinations and so forth intervening in the bardo itself. If your principal practice was Chandali, then during the stages of dissolution, and in particular the internal dissolution, the whiteness, redness, and blackness, you would do the Chandali practice and thereby experience these stages as the emergence of the wisdom of unified bliss emptiness.
Tene ta tejendo yang kapkala ta tanda nasatang suzerla sopa yungre tene nasatang suzerla sopa chung kapsala ya ta ngarange semke nyamnyong tong jarne tanda nasalam de cherwanda nasalam cherse du nasingola tani tene nyamni te chong to pasena tige tingenzan la yang pengi warela tene nyamlin la yang pengi warela tene sumu chunga la yang pengi ware tene tichen sem naldo pap to la yang pengi ware la tene teta baje gomne ta nyamlin chi go warela ya teta bo ta che hinia hira gom manyong ki tene london hira gom manyong ki tene the kunzo songchu bisen lo jong me nga ikira ga manyung ki tene yinna nyam to panda ko kanya me panda ko ji yinna tene chela ji zawa lamala ni lamala ni dan lamala mu gu ji ni tene gong gu re tene sung gi warala ta te ramba yin to gam sur te ta ngarang chu ge te thamram ten zo yung kapsula sai kom te chola tempe kapso ta chita dong no ta dong song ta ten zu chung kapso la tene ninkar tene rang lamate gamne tene tela tepa tong mu chi chi tu sine solwata yiji solwata tene tejendo chui kamte tene chuhamte sai kam sakam sai kam te cholata choham mela tempe kapsula ta ti kap ji chinong song ta tenzo gombe kapsula tene ngaran so tewala tene rang lama te yu ya pa gomne tene te ta gombe che da tene me kam te tempe kapsula tene rang tawala lama ya pa gomne tene te la surwa se ji ta ti chorwa to no tenzo chung kapla tene longa kamte tempe kapsala tene tarang zawe lama te ya tene jesu ne ya si pene ngarang number hipa te tukalam po ne te ngara korwe dungal le tarwe mikbanda po tene chiko kre tene song
data jom korani nana de song do iran data de dambo de sa chula tempe kapsa nyinka gomso tene chu mela tempe kasa tewa gongre rimpa gongre dena na tewa gomsong do. Another thing that is a beneficial preparation for going through the process of dying is the practice of taking sickness and pain on the path. Opportunities for this occur whenever you experience physical pain or sickness, which does happen from time to time throughout one's life. And the practice consists of looking directly at the nature of the sensation of discomfort, pain, or sickness. This has several benefits. It is very helpful to one's practice of meditation in general. It also, to some extent, alleviates or dissipates the suffering. And in particular, in this context, it prepares you to be able to rest your mind during the dying process. Now, someone who is not engaged in a great deal of meditation of any kind, tranquility, insight, mind training, or any of the other practices, but has devotion for their guru, should emphasize that in particular during the dying process. For example, during the first stage of dissolution, when earth dissolves into water, when the outer, inner, and secret signs of that occurring arise, you would then visualize your Guru in your heart and supplicate him one-pointedly with faith and devotion. When, subsequent to that, water dissolves into fire and the signs of that arise, you would visualize the Guru in the navel and supplicate. When fire dissolves into wind, you would visualize the Guru inside your head at the level of the forehead and supplicate. And finally, when wind dissolves into consciousness, you would visualize the Guru some distance above your head and try to dissolve your mind into the Guru's heart.
Tene ta tige tanong shoki ta jitanga temrim tinsu chartang. Tene ti tanda ti kapsula kandisi nyamlin chi gugi yapa. Ti kororo yubarella tene tering. Te zon sena. Te se ya. Te zon rabu ta tuwan rabu nangi yana naro nangi.
Tuna Bardo nipa tsaware nwa. Bardo nipa de.
Ta ti nipa di hel samare.
Ola
Nipa
so.
di poa menwa jitang.
Ola so. So this morning we looked at the stages of dissolution which occur in the Bardo of the time of death, and this afternoon at the various practices which can be used both in preparation for it and during it. Therefore, I'm going to stop there for this afternoon, and I'll take any questions you would like to ask.
Rinpoche, I have a question about your subject this morning. It's a little medical in nature. You were talking about how when the central channel, the white is coming down and the red is coming up. So in the Gushi, we have, in the medical text, we have the...
What's Gushi?
Gushi.
Oh, the Jushi.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the medical text, we have it as the seat of Pigin, and ignorance is in the head, and Tripa is in the middle part of the body, and then Lung is in the bottom, and the three, with the 500 nerves connecting to the navel. So I'm wondering what the difference is between this main channel coming down, and then that understanding that I have some confusion.
Tata de dinana sombata de yana dene tsa umage yane la kacha da mane la macha shugado so. Jushi ge gomba ta de yana dene trawa la pekin timo ke ne dendang. Dene luji ula tripa yana and dene o de la long. De ge den sum yore segado. De ni ge drelzo kando yore.
Ti nigen resute tanda ngaranso tanda chiu kapje ne kap te ta chitang ke sembu kapla sonung te tembo sin negi yoba jai ta tini tin chiu kapsala rimji ta te karlam ton malam ten so sharne ta te durim te la lamdu chergu yore la te lamdu chergu kapje noa te kande hyage yoba te salu ki chitu songa rewa teni chitanga jigi ki na ne kande songa re se na ta ti chitanga ne kap nasa langwa ki chen rawa te nasa ne mandawa ngu zongu du nasa ka ngo te ta tangpo yen rawa te kaba yoba ta teni te ma nasa te ma nengu du te la tapka ke karisi go ge yopa ti kap je te impi chen na teni te nasa te tempo sin ngu zong chitu yo na ning jirwa.
Well, the context of the two descriptions are somewhat different. The description here is concerned with an explanation of what is experienced at that stage of dying, and specifically the appearances which result from the withdrawal of the life wind. And the appearances are the whiteness, redness, and blackness, which are caused by the downward and upward movement of the white and red constituents, respectively. The context of the explanation in the four tantras is likely to be an explanation of the conditions which cause illness or sickness. As you know, in order to diagnose an illness, you must first of all recognize its place of origin. and therefore the seats of the humors are identified in that way.
And is is it the same channel as the black channel, the white channel, the red channel?
You know that the Jushin and the Sumbaki that the long trip pekin sumge ke za de dang that the in and the Sumbaki za umate the kala malam nalam yoma ke gender job and then you za chipareve.
Tiki Ransom Zakanda Mendo. Tachitang Tandati Ji Nandu Swati Ludi Tabla Zona whatever. Tene Tandati Chitang Solunti Lunsoa Tonki Shegi or Matuhi Tatila Nike Pandabo Tindig Zaumati Chitang Solunti Neti Tomba Domotin Yep Salt in the song you are. Tini ti tong chat long jang du tini te chu nyam du tini ti kalam malam ti ha.
Rinpoche said he thinks that they're probably different channels. Because the channels explained in that context within the four tantras are those which are necessary to understand and affect in order to produce or maintain health. Here, the avaduti being explained is normally considered to be empty of content, except for this inflating life wind, which inflates it or fills it so that the constituents are kept in place.
I actually have two questions. One is about near-death experiences and those that all the similar stories of seeing the white light and going through the tunnel, have they actually died and have gone through the winds, or are they just experiencing the white channel? Therefore, it creates a lot of similarity in stories. It seems that nobody ever talks about red light that they see and have negative experiences.
Shachu Jape Kab, Gadri, Shachu Jape Kab Yanare, Yana Chin Momboyore, Hala, Shitsana, Zu Yonke Momboyora. That's a monk Javake Nangwa Tumawala, a couple Zavatawanda, Zanzana, Penangatsuka Sawo ke Dosa Yorwa, they get ring a couple Tawa, Ganawa Moboshagores, Halam Chekbada, Lagiores. That's all get Toya de Kalam, the Nawa de Rebes.
Pashir kalam go to Bandamendo.
Go to Parade.
Kalam Tamalam Tenzu Harsadi Tenichu Lord Bakali Kapoda. Kalam go that's only Tini Kapo of the Kalam
Batala, the Kalam Gagoda, Latsudan. Well, since it's generally said that the white appearance, it's not a white channel, but the white appearance is sort of the last, as far as you can go and come back, then it would make sense that would be that probably what they're describing is the beginning of the whiteness, the experience of whiteness.
And the red comes after that.
Yes.
And my other question is, if someone is in a quick death, like in a car accident or such, I know that you've once told that the shutting down happens very fast. When do you actually know that you've died?
Lobo de Shiwayana, Penagadri Dapadawayana. Didn't Timrim did so Ngoma Song the Jopo Sagare song. They and the she song Kado Hakogre.
Tate Jitang Desi Longla Jongba Davata, Bardo la Jongba Yankita, not Desi, Musain Lagarava, the Jongba Mangin, Desi Musain Kagarava.
That again would depend upon the degree of training. Someone who is well trained in the path in general, and especially in the preparation for the Bardo, would be likely to recognize that they're dead quicker than another person.
Thank you.
Rinpoche, if somebody who is well trained should, because of an accident or because of illness, suffer a prolonged period of dementia, mental faculties before their death, upon death, would they still be able to retain the necessary, what you need, to recall and remember what to do and so on and so forth? In other words, if you go through, let's say, months of being, okay, so you know my question then. Thank you.
Tata de gadri popa yana natsa kashe ke nopa yana susu ke lepa halam de peju mepa do cha dene drempa so potsan e meken detso ke de ngoma ke lam jone jesu de do jona shiwe khapsa drempa tets lep sigrepes shitsane
다텔라 나라서 칠로네 따고 값을라 다티 템파메바 더버지레데 이나이 너가 뒤처럼 메로 오지레.
They would probably still appear to be in that state of dementia to an observer, but they might reclaim some of their faculties as they actually approach the moment of death. However, that might not be evident to the caregiver.
카히 다와몬볼라 다티 간식으로 꼬마 쳐대세가 드니 디갑라 드니 되게 아야 고대 반다보 다 히데 반다보 저여 로지로 드니 히게도
소유도에
히게도
시ren게 값서
맞아 솔로 용한테 되어라
솔로 용
꼬마 제네 나와서
오래 다 컨서야 몸보 고선세
몸보 깨졌는데 고선
오래
히게도
For example, there are a lot of reports of people when they emerge from comas, in spite of the fact that they appeared to be completely insensible during the time of their coma, reporting an awareness of what was said around them and who visited them and so on.
Rinpoche, could you talk a little bit about what the ground consciousness is for an ordinary person with no realization, and what that ground consciousness is for someone who has some realization?
Let me ask you something. Do you mean the ground clear light or the all basis consciousness? Because they're very different.
They're very different, and that's
which one are you asking about? Or are you asking about both?
Ground consciousness for a person who has no realization.
No, there's ground clear light, and there's an all basis consciousness.
All basis.
You want the all basis consciousness?
Correct.
Okay. That the morange laba de shi namje de kandare dose. Then she usa jikesha yanam kunji namje jikesha yanam dresons. Morange kunji namje jikesha inse. Then not tevatere that the lam jongwe kansaki kunji namje dam lam ma jongwa ke kansaki kunji namje la chepa yorebe.
Teaching ojireo. Tatige lam jang 당하란수 장바티 로니 로타이 다와니 다완타이 테니 카히 다베 세랍니 제와니 제와 세랍니 세랍라 장바티 여러 로비 와래라 티 여러로야 티 두바 히지 넘버 히바 생기죠 말이 다 공연 넘버 히바다 두바 히지 넘버 히바다 하블라 이나코 두시 디텐 조도비 와래 넌선 야르도비 와래 테니 티 코란라 테지 지 태야지 마도 티게 모데라 Juranda Wikido, Yungio Marilla. Deep watch out the Kanagawi or a Kingi number keep it into Yawi or then Kingi number keep it in the deep watch out the Tendo, Saldo. That tea Rimba Yendo Yajin Roji Yapati, Candida and the Yungi or a Kingi number keep it into Yungi or la, Teni Longla, Jomba Nepic, Kingi number Hibata, Longla Jamba Yepik, Kingi number Hiba, Tenzola Pichaver Chimboche. That's the watch out the Chazan.
Because the all basis consciousness is the receptacle for all habits, it must be asserted that there is a great deal of difference between the state of the all basis consciousness of an untrained individual and that of a trained individual. If someone practices assiduously over a long period of time, at least year after year, and really life after life, the container for the gradual progress or improvement that is occurring through their practice must be the all-basis consciousness. It cannot merely be the sixth consciousness, because the sixth consciousness arises and ceases. It is ephemeral. It certainly cannot be the five sense consciousnesses, which are non-conceptual functions. So since it cannot be any of those, principally we must regard the all-basis consciousness as the container for the positive habits that constitute that person's progress. Therefore, someone who has been practicing for a long time is going to have an all-basis consciousness that is, in effect, quite different from that of an untrained person.
Teni pugul habdal ndog as gigging lap yung du tela ta ko tuba hiji number keeping wala tere something no to je la te koran ranging yal do jwa te koran yal do jre te yin ya ti khasin hi yapati sani yal yo marela te kana nyar re sin ko hi number keep te ndo nyar ne te koran jesik par dal ko te kadu yin ya te yapa ndo je yung gre te ke hi number hi te ndo te ne pacha te pe yal sona te koran je do di ya khare ma to te yin te ke hi number hi pati deng rimbo nyar ge yo re la te gendal pe ngaranzo gomne nyamne cheni ta pe pocha tupu yo pocha tembo yo ba yin te yen rimbo te zani chaya zoya me pa te ko jesi so ma ji ke patro chembe ndo.
The reason for this is that the all-basis consciousness is continuous, and in its continuity it is able to retain seeds or habits. And these seeds or habits are what, for example, allow us to retain information even when we're not thinking about it. For example, when a child goes to school and their teacher says to them, this is this and that is that, the child takes this information in with a function of the sixth consciousness. The child thinks, this is this and that is that. Those thoughts are functions of the sixth consciousness. Nevertheless, even when the child doesn't think about these things, goes to sleep that day, and wakes up the next morning, they still know or remember what they were taught. You can't say that that memory abides within the sixth consciousness, because they haven't been thinking about it in between. The sixth consciousness has not been functioning in relation to that information. The only thing that is continuous to that degree is the all-basis consciousness, which therefore must be regarded as the receptacle for continuous information. This is all the more true and all the more obvious when we talk about the results of long-term meditation practice. The stable or deep habit arisen from meditation practice that is stable or deep enough not to be disturbed, that will continue to accrue until Buddhahood, abides within that person's all-basis consciousness.
So Rinpoche, at the moment of death, in that case, is it effective to cut all attachment to a sense of self, or will the base consciousness still have the greatest effect? Is that where the karma is stored? And therefore, the karma just goes on into the next existence?
I don't understand the either or part of that.
Well, if there's a recognition of the mother and the child clear light, or the nature of mind, or any one of the techniques that Rinpoche said, bringing devotion and sending your mind into the heart of the Guru, at the moment of death, if your commitment is to those things and not to a self, is that helpful?
Okay. You mean, is that going to stop the all-basis from causing it? Okay.
Correct.
That the yangsi lambapo the la kunji namshi insarese gitu. Karajine leji jun leji bakcha ki jun chongken raw nut raw deres. That the chibe lamche ditso pena the tonyi gomba yanam the lama gomba yanam tonglen gomba yanam kang yanam ditso la utsu jape kaso the usel mabu treba yana Dene kunji ki junche dogrebes. Leche junche dogre yana yangsil lengrebes. Dona kunji ki nangna yopa ke leche bakchak ditso jang dogrebes.
Tela jitang ke ta kunji number hipa tela ta korang ngote desi marik bana. Kari se na kunji la sacha ta tongcha kunji ngorang ingi madru tongba imba che ta korang ke noa na suba hero ke sacha che number ni yo de la. Di salcha tela tene tesi salcha tela tesi chulu hundu tene rang ngote tongba imba te ngui ma sin ba. Ngui ma sin tene ko noa namba na suba hero yo re. Mato ta korang ngote rang ingi tongba re. Tene tela vesal mabu ngon tre na tene tige ngo ranging ki tomba te ngo saying ko ngo ranging tomba te ngo saying undu tela tene tela ya ta chitang ngo sing yo re la ngo saying undu tela ya ta ngaran so hajang jangba chimbo je yina ta ngone sangjen ro yo re te yina jangba te so medu ta koran te ngo saying tong tene ti nyam to pa hyar tsam nyam yo ji to tene ke no mo pa hyar gu yo re la tene ya ti ge vesal ma bu re ne pe lam la pen to chen bo yung yo re te ina yo ko sur down yo
Sur down karawa.
sur down yo pa cha to
Ore.
te pa cha to ji sur down na ya ta ti nyam to pa che par ji ji tene ya no chun ho tin zu nyong du do ta chun ho tin zu chung du do ta je wa zang bo le to pa le zang bo za to pa te pen to chen bo yung re wa 아코랑 문이 산 뒤에 또 바지 정도 말해봐.
Ore.
다들 진짜 다운 그래봐.
It really depends upon the degree of meeting of the mother and son. The all basis consciousness is in its fundamental characteristic is ignorance. Its nature is emptiness. And it is that emptiness is at the same time lucidity, because the mind can experience. The all basis consciousness arises because the mind is overwhelmed by the intensity of its own lucidity, and thereby or therefore fails to recognize its own emptiness. And that failure of recognition subsequent absence of recognition is the all basis consciousness. So as long as that ignorance continues, the all basis consciousness's function as a container of karmic imprints will continue. Now, if the person at death who recognizes the ground clear light, for whom the mother and son clear lights meet, does so in a situation of extraordinary training, so that the recognition is absolute, then they achieve Buddhahood. And then there's no more all basis consciousness and no more karmic imprints. But usually what is meant by the meeting of the mother and son clear lights is something short of that, where the person does recognize the ground clear light and does remain within it, but not totally or powerfully enough to utterly eradicate all habits. And therefore, through habit, they do at some point re-arise from that ground clear light into the equivalent of a post-meditative state, and therefore the other appearances of the Bardo will to some extent arise. Now, the situation of that person will be very different from that of someone who did not recognize the ground clear light. There is a great deal of virtue that is a result of this, for one thing, and also a great deal of diminishment of the degree of bewilderment that will follow. But nevertheless, because the immersion in the recognition was not enough to achieve Buddhahood, it hasn't destroyed the all basis consciousness. There is still some ignorance, and therefore there will still be a continuity of karmic seeds.
I'd like to ask two caregiver questions. We practice with a lot of corpses at Karmazong because people have been dying. Sometimes, particularly for Chöd practitioners, it's clear that the people are upset. They wander around, freak out, cause disturbance. Sometimes they don't know they've died. Sometimes they're stuck because they've committed suicide. Are there very specific instructions besides actually doing the Chöd for alleviating that pain, for making it clear to them they've died, or releasing them if they're stuck? That's the first. The second question is, if you have to remove someone's body before the 3 days are up, how do you keep them from being very upset? Because I know that they need to be around their body in the 3 days to see that their body is disintegrating, to let go. There have been people who have been removed because it's the law to Karmazong who have not been very happy about that, who are confused and upset, and you can feel that strongly. So I'd like to know about both situations.
Shikenge shepji shuwa ke kolare. Da moronga de shitsawa de soge namshi mobo tong topa de shisha nere. Da moronga de sege do tuwa nido. Dampo de that de Karmazong ne de me mobo shige do se. Shikin de sola robo zogi yoris. Tupna konsu ke ro te shagi yoris. Ro shakwe kaso moronge konsu ke namche tongi yoris. Mongchewa sempa tukne patsu drogados. Shi tsa kashe ke shi son hamago. Kashe ke rongso chut tsa ken detso ke dunga nang do jingi yoris. De nane chut nyamlen zoken detso yang sempa pe trogados shi tsa we kaso. Patsu mampo drogado, dene dramandra mampo zogado se. De chewa dampo de konso la pempe tap. Shi tsane konso namshi de strukpa de so pempe tap kandro yoris. Chu dongados, pempe tap chu dongados. De pempe tap chenda kanya, de chewa chek dong. Chewa nipa de tupna mige ro de shapo sum shagi yoris. Yang it's chendan galwares. Maunchawa ke shaposam mado ngane te tata de jungi lengwakdos. De konso kontro zagi yorese. De na shi tsawa konso ke namche. Konso ke shaposam ro mashatna te konso te sempa trugirese.
Tuwa tamu kansi sun. Namshin chundu ji.
Namche pempe tap kando ya.
Ta te la zo chambata niji gam, teni melam yapu ja, teni ta je solnde ta, teni iram jalai gam den rabu ta, ta tendi sena pe pengre ba, tegi penga wajiri. Teni tanda je tanga taga taji pengi yo me, samsung. Teni taji tanga jitanga ta, maza 팽그레 받대 있나요? 다티 바르드는 처음 두고 갈지 다나 하장자 배도 좀 뭔가 그래. 대 트라이니 받대 진거.
로 샤포섬 샤마타
야바데. 로 샤포섬 야나 타치당 그 데지 다티라 바르드게 티 가게가 나나 되네 야 당보네 데지 로텔 자긴도 보지지. Tene jini ne pa mepa sina tati pa men ga sang sam sam no khar ge ore sam ore la te ta khapusum ya mathab na ya te khita chepra ho jmari ke.
In answer to your first question, the best things you can do for the consciousness of the recently deceased person is to cultivate as much love and compassion in your mind as you can, to make aspirations and supplications on their behalf, and to do the practice of yidam. Rinpoche said, I don't know that the practice of Chö is of that much help in this situation. Of course, Chu is very helpful as a practice in general, but it's not specifically helpful to those who are recently dead. In answer to your second question, most commentaries on the Bardo say that immediately after death, the person is quite attached to their corpse, but that as time goes on, they become disgusted with it and want to see it destroyed. Because of that, he thinks that it shouldn't be too much of a problem if the body is disposed before the 3 days are up.
Rinpoche, I've been told a lot by Lama Chidrak that when beings are freaked out, that Chenrezig helps a lot. And that seems to be the case, because people who I've advised have used that. I'd like to know exactly why Chenrezig practice in this situation would be useful. What is it about Chenrezig exactly, besides the fact that he looks on all beings with compassion?
That the Lama Chidrak is on that Lama Chidrak is on that the Chenrezig jegom de pemase pengire de kosa shiwa poke namshela the nguneke pengire so dene morongi ya nyamnyo yores morong da moronge de getuk de so ke peje thona dene pembadras pepe jutsen mishes la shenda le bakwa Chenrezig chepa de pemba chewa de kares
다 단다 조 가리송 거 요래세나 드니 상지에당 장주 선바 통지 이제 톡 이히징 어때라 릭섬 검보세 그래라 드니 상지에당 장주 선바 통지 이제 톡 쳔병 어때 드니 파반 자말이야 예 송도텔라 드니 나란스 히랍 펠와다 이힌 펠와라 드니 잠발이야 솔와다 잠발이야 감나 펜토 쳔부 용송이 요래라 대견도라 파파 상지도 전주 선바통지 저 단다 누붕어데 간데레세나 부상도 보잖아도 지인데 쟁이도 파시 살게 탑라 드니 손도 지인 현반도보다 손도 진도 감 대편도 책이 있습니다. 대 상지도 전주 선바통지 저 니징어데 간데레세나 파파 쟁이세 잠바도 니징어에 비쳤나 대대 트로반다고 텐데라 다대
Generally speaking, what is said is that the three bodhisattvas that we call the lords of the three families are the embodiment of three aspects of the wisdom of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The aspect of wisdom that is discernment is embodied by Manjushri. And therefore it's taught that supplication of Manjushri, meditation on Manjushri, is especially effective for the increase of discernment. The ability of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is embodied by Vajrapani. And therefore supplication of Vajrapani, meditation on Vajrapani, is held to be especially effective for the alleviation of obstacles and impediments. In the same way, the kindness and the love and compassion of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas is embodied in Chenrezig. And therefore, supplication of Chenrezig, meditation on Chenrezig is going to be particularly effective in this type of situation.
One more thing. Thank you. This is a stupid question, I think, but I have to ask it, actually. Since Chud is a Vajrayana Tonglen, which is a compassion practice, why wouldn't the being who has died really feel the impact of that practice as compassion?
Chud je nyamlen de ka so lujin lo sa kyo ro wa. Chud je nyamlen de don la de Tonglen ke jedak cheres. The Sangha Lokji Tonglen around it. The Tonglen de Ninja gone the Paratap Yinsang, Chu Gona, Shiva Poke, Ninja, Digi, Mapempa de Kares.
Tati, Keg Mikvalaka Chegi or Sena, Tening around poor par, Tening Rotins to, or Tening Talandit in the Jimbatang, Tening Chegi or
Because of the visualizations, the samadhi of Chö, as you know well, consists of ejecting your consciousness, slicing and dicing your body, and feeding it to other beings. The person who's just died has had enough of that kind of thing. Let's stop there.
Ja